It's Wednesday. It's 6 o'clock. It's Tales and Cocktails. Good evening. This evening, let me start with reminding you of who William Randolph Hearst was. He was born in 1863, died in 1951. This is from Wikipedia, American businessman, newspaper publisher, and politician who developed the nation's largest newspaper chain and media company, Hearst Communications. Now, I'll remind you that Orson Welles, at 25, in 1941, made the film Citizen Kane. And Kane was unmistakably William Randolph Hearst. And William Randolph Hearst was not amused. He really started a vendetta against Welles because of that. He was the original media tycoon, and Marion Davies, the film actress, became his mistress. Now, Hearst purchased for her 15 separate oceanfront lots. The Georgian Revival main mansion, ocean house that he built for her, had 100 plus rooms, 36 fireplaces, and 55 bathrooms. It was demolished because of earthquake damage in the 1950s. But this piece I'm going to read you, has a description by Charlie Chaplin of Hearst Castle. And here we go. Hearst's 400,000-acre ranch at San Simeon extended 30 miles along the Pacific coast. The living quarters were set back on a plateau like a citadel, 500 feet above sea level and 4 miles from the ocean. The main chateau was built from several castles shipped over in crates from Europe. The facade looked like a combination of Reims Cathedral and a gigantic Swiss chalet. Surrounding it, like vanguards, were 5 Italian villas set in on the edge of the plateau, each housing 6 guests. They were furnished in Italian style with Baroque ceilings from which carved seraphs and cherubs smiled down at you. In the main chateau were rooms for 30 more guests. The reception room was almost 90 by 50 feet, hung with Gobelin tapestries, some genuine, some faked. In this baronial atmosphere were backgammon tables and pinball games at each end of the room. The dining room was a small replica of the nave of Westminster Abbey and seated comfortably 80 guests. The house personnel numbered 60. Within hearing distance of the chateau was a zoo containing lions, tigers, bears, apes, orangutans, birds, and reptiles. From the large gates to the chateau was a 5-mile drive flanked with notices. Animals have the right of way. One waited in one's car while a brace of ostriches made up their minds to get off the roads. Ewes, deer, elks, and buffaloes roamed the estate in herds and impeded one's progress. There were cars to meet the guests at the railway station, or if you came by plane, there was a private landing field. If you happened to arrive between meals, you were shown your quarters and instructed that dinner was at 8 and cocktails would be served in the main hall at 7:30. For amusement, there was swimming, horseback riding, tennis, and games of every description, or a visit to the zoo. Hearst made a rigid rule, that no one could get a cocktail until 6 in the evening, but Marion Davies, his mistress, Marion would gather her friends at her quarters where cocktails were served surreptitiously. The dinners were elaborate. The menu read like a Charles I banquet. There was game of the season, pheasant, wild duck, partridge, and venison. Yet amidst this opulence, we were served paper napkins. and it was only when Mrs. Hearst was in residence that the guests were given linen ones. Mrs. Hearst visited San Simeon annually, and nothing conflicted. The coexistence between Marion and Mrs. Hearst was mutually understood. When it was nearing time for Mrs. Hearst's arrival, Marion and the rest of us would discreetly leave or return to Marion's Santa Monica beach house. I had known Millicent Hearst since 1916, and we were very good friends, so I had a visa to both establishments. When ensconced at the ranch with her San Francisco society friends, she would ask me for the weekend, and I would show up as though it were my first visit of the season. But Millicent had no illusions. Although feigning ignorance of the recent exodus, she had a sense of humor about it. If it weren't Marion, it would be someone else, she said. She often talked confidentially with me about the relationship of Marion and W.R., but never with bitterness. He still acts as though nothing had ever happened between us, and as if Marion doesn't exist, she said. When I arrive, he is always sweet and charming, but never stays more than a few hours, and it's always the same routine. In the middle of dinner, the butler hands him a note. Then he excuses himself and leaves the table. When he returns, he sheepishly mentions that some urgent business matter needs his immediate attention in Los Angeles, and we all pretend to believe him. And of course, we all know he returns to join Marion. One evening after dinner, I accompanied Millicent on a walk about the grounds. The chateau was drenched in moonlight, looking wondrous and ghostly against the wild setting of the 7 mountain tops. The stars pierced an intensely clear sky. We stood a moment, taking in the panoramic beauty. From the zoo, the occasional roar of a lion could be heard, and the continual scream of an enormous orangutan that echoed and bounced about the mountain tops. It was eerie and terrifying, for each evening at sundown, the orangutan would start quietly at first, then working up to horrific screaming, which lasted on into the night. That wretched animal must be insane, I said. The whole place is crazy. Look at it, she said, viewing the chateau. The creation of Mad Otto, and he'll go on building and adding to it till the day he dies. Then what use will it be? No one can afford to keep it up. As an hotel, it's useless, and if he leaves it to the state, I doubt whether they can make any use of it, even as a university. One evening when I arrived at San Simeon for a weekend, Marion met me nervous and excited. One of the guests had been attacked with a razor as he was crossing the grounds. Marion stuttered whenever excited, which added to her charm, and gave her a lady in distress quality. We don't know yet who did it, she whispered, but W.R. has several detectives searching the grounds, and we're trying to keep the news away from the other guests. Some think that the attacker was a Filipino, so W.R. has had every Filipino put off the ranch until a proper investigation is made. Who is the man that's been attacked? I asked. You'll see him this evening at dinner, she said. At dinner, I sat opposite a young man whose face was swathed in bandages. All that could be seen were his gleaming eyes and white teeth, which he bared in a perpetual smile. Marion nudged me under the table. That's him, she whispered. He seemed none the worse for the attack, and had a very good appetite. To all inquiries about the matter, he just shrugged and grinned. After dinner, Marion showed me where the assault had taken place. It was behind that statue, she said, pointing to a marble replica of Winged Victory. Here are the bloodstains. What was he doing behind the statue? I asked. Trying to get away from the attacker, she answered. Suddenly, out of the night, Our guest appeared again, his face dripping with blood as he staggered past us. Marion screamed, and I jumped 3 feet. In a moment, 20 men from nowhere surrounded him. "I've been attacked again," he moaned. He was borne on the arms of 2 detectives and taken back to his room, where they questioned him. Marion disappeared, but I saw her in the main hall an hour later. "What happened?" I asked. She looked skeptical. "They say he did it himself. He's a nut and just wants attention." Without further compunction, the eccentric was bundled off the hill that night, and the poor Filipinos returned to their work in the morning. Hearst Castle by Charles Chaplin. And while we're on the West Coast, this is called How a Night in Casablanca Kept Its Name. When the Marx brothers were about to make a movie called A Night in Casablanca, there were threats of legal action from the Warner brothers, who, 5 years before, had made a picture called simply Casablanca, with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman as stars. Whereupon Groucho, speaking for his brothers and himself, immediately dispatched the following letters. Dear Warner Brothers, apparently there is more than one way of conquering a city and holding it as your own. For example, up to the time that we contemplated making this picture, I had no idea that the city of Casablanca belonged exclusively to Warner Brothers. However, it was only a few days after our announcement appeared that we received your long, ominous legal document warning us not to use the name Casablanca. It seems that in 1471, Ferdinand Balboa Warner, your great-great-grandfather, while looking for a shortcut to the city of Burbank, had stumbled on the shores of Africa and, raising his alpenstock, which he later turned in for 100 shares of the common, named it Casablanca. I just don't understand your attitude. Even if you plan on re-releasing your picture, I am sure that the average movie fan could learn in time to distinguish between Ingrid Bergman and Harpo. I don't know whether I could, but I certainly would like to try. You claim you own Casablanca and that no one else can use that name without your permission. What about Warner Brothers? Do you own that too? You probably have the right to use the name Warner, but what about brothers? Professionally, we were brothers long before you were. We were touring the sticks as the Marx brothers when Vitaphone was still a gleam in the inventor's eye. And even before us, there had been other brothers. The Smith brothers, the brothers Karamazov, Dan brothers, an outfielder with Detroit, and Brother Can You Spare a Dime? This was originally Brothers Can You Spare a Dime, but this was spreading a dime pretty thin, so they threw out one brother, gave all the money to the other one, and whittled it down to Brother Can You Spare a Dime? Now, Jack, how about you? Do you maintain that yours is an original name? Well, it's not. It was used long before you were born. Offhand, I can think of 2 Jacks. There was Jack of Jack and the Beanstalk and Jack the Ripper, who cut quite a figure in his day. As for you, Harry, you probably sign your checks sure in the belief that you are the first Harry of all time and that all other Harrys are imposters. I can think of 2 Harrys that preceded you. There was Light Horse Harry of Revolutionary fame, and a Harry Applebaum who lived on the corner of 93rd Street and Lexington Avenue. Unfortunately, Applebaum wasn't too well known. The last I heard of him, he was selling neckties at Weber and Heilbronner. Now, about the Burbank studio, I believe this is what you brothers call your place. Old man Burbank is gone. Perhaps you remember him. He was a great man in a garden. His wife often said Luther had 10 green thumbs. What a witty woman she must have been. Burbank was the wizard who crossed all those fruits and vegetables until he had the poor plants in such a confused and jittery condition that they could never decide whether to enter the dining room on the meat platter or the dessert dish. This is pure conjecture, of course, but who knows? Perhaps Burbank's survivors aren't too happy with the fact that a plant that grinds out pictures on a quota settled in their town, appropriated Burbank's name, and used it as a front for their films. It is even possible that the Burbank family is prouder of the potato produced by the old man than they are of the fact that from your studio emerged Casablanca, or even Gold Diggers of 1931. This all seems to add up to a pretty bitter tirade, but I assure you it's not meant to. I love Warners. Some of my best friends are Warner Brothers. It is even possible that I am doing you an injustice, and that you yourselves know nothing at all about this dog-in-the-manger attitude. It wouldn't surprise me at all to discover that the heads of your legal department are unaware of this absurd dispute, for I am acquainted with many of them, and they are fine fellows with curly black hair, double-breasted suits, and a love of their fellow man that out-Saroyan. I have the hunch that this attempt to prevent us from using the title is the brainchild of some ferret-faced shyster serving a brief apprenticeship in your legal department. I know the type well. Hot out of law school, hungry for success, and too ambitious to follow the natural laws of promotion. This bar sinister probably needled your attorneys, most of whom are fine fellows with curly black hair, double-breasted suits, etc., into attempting to enjoin us. Well, he won't get away with it. We'll fight him to the highest court. No pasty-faced legal adventurer is going to cause bad blood between the Warners and the Marxes. We are all brothers under the skin and will remain friends till the last reel of A Night in Casablanca goes tumbling over the spool. Sincerely, Groucho Marx. For some curious reason, this letter seemed to puzzle the Warner Brothers legal department. They wrote in all seriousness, and asked if the Marxists could give them some idea of what their story was about. They felt that something might be worked out. So Groucho replied, "Dear Warners, there isn't much I can tell you about the story. In it, I play a doctor of divinity who ministers to the natives and, as a sideline, hawks can openers and pea jackets to the savages along the Gold Coast of Africa. When I first meet Chico, he was working in a saloon, selling sponges to barflies who are unable to carry their liquor. Harpo is an Arabian caddy who lives in a small Grecian urn on the outskirts of the city. As the picture opens, Porridge, a mealy-mouthed native girl, is sharpening some arrows for the hunt. Paul Hangover, our hero, is constantly lighting 2 cigarettes simultaneously. He apparently is unaware of the cigarette shortage. There are many scenes of splendor and fierce antagonists, and color. An Abyssinian messenger boy runs riot. Riot, in case you have never been there, is a small nightclub out on the edge of town. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I don't want to spoil it for you. All this has been okayed by the Hayes office, Good Housekeeping, and the survivors of the Haymarket riots. And if the times are ripe, this picture can be the opening gun in a new worldwide disaster. Cordially, Groucho Marx." Instead of mollifying them, this note seemed to puzzle the attorneys even more. They wrote back and said they still didn't understand the storyline, and they would appreciate it if Mr. Marx would explain the plot in more detail. So Groucho obliged with the following. "Dear brothers, since I last wrote you, I regret to say there have been some changes in the plot of our new picture, A Night in Casablanca. In the new version, I play Bordello, the sweetheart of Humphrey Bogart. Harpo and Chico are itinerant rug peddlers who are weary of laying rugs and enter a monastery just for a lark. This is a good joke on them, as there hasn't been a lark in the place for 15 years. Across from this monastery, hard by a jetty, is a waterfront hotel, chock full of apple-cheeked damsels, most of whom have been barred by the Hayes office for soliciting. In the fifth reel, Gladstone makes a speech that sets the House of Commons in an uproar, and the king promptly asks for his resignation. Harpo marries a hotel detective. Chico operates an ostrich farm. Humphrey Bogart's girl, Bordello, spends her last years in a Bacall house. This, as you can see, is a very skimpy outline. The only thing that can save us from extinction is a continuation of the film shortage. Fondly, Groucho Marx. After that, the Marxes heard no more from the Warner Brothers legal department. All right, my dears, that's it for tonight. I hope that gave you a good chuckle. It certainly delights me. And I'm delighted to have found it and to be able to share it with you. So thank you very much for being with me, and I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 6 o'clock for Tales and Cocktails. Good night.